Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Eddie Barco, and welcome to the Nebula Music Podcast. If this is your first time hearing of my show or checking out an interview of mine, I have had this podcast for about 3 or 4 years. It's predominantly an audio podcast. It's on Spotify and on Apple, but I've been working really hard to get a lot of these interviews uploaded onto YouTube. But for today, to start off, I have an interview with Scott Tyler. He's a frontman of a band called the Shadowboxers, a very good band. They've worked with many great people, opened up for huge acts. They were very recently working with Justin Timberlake and his label. And Scott's story is just very, very interesting. If you're a musician, if you're a songwriter, if you're interested in having a career in the music industry, a lot of the interviews I do are catered for you because my passion is really just exploring the mindset of these people that have succeeded or that are succeeding. And I like to really just dig in and find out what drives that passion, maybe even explore some challenges that they've had along the way, because that's how I learn. And I know that it helped me a lot in my how do you say it? I think I messed up the word. Developmental years to grow in my musicianship and also in my career as a drummer and all that. Anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. This is my interview with Scott Tyler of the Shadowboxers. All right, what is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here once again, and welcome to the Nebula Music Podcast. You guys know me. I'm always excited because I get the opportunity to talk to really cool musicians, people that I've listened to their music and I admire, or that I just find influential, that are doing really cool things. And today's guest is definitely no exception to that matter. I have Mr. Scott Tyler of the Shadowboxers joining me on today's episode. Scott, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Before we even started the interview, me and Scott were talking about this little mini heat wave that we had in Los Angeles just a couple days ago. And it was just insane because, you know, with everything that's been happening, LA's been a very interesting town lately, but weather-wise, it's been pretty normal-ish. And then out of nowhere, we were just bombarded with desert heat. And you're out in the valley with me, man. So you dealt with that pretty well. How are you liking the summers out here? Because you've spent, what, like 2 summers here already in LA?
Yeah, this is my second one. I like them so far. I remember when the quarantine first began this year, there was like a torrential downpour.
Yeah.
And then now, as you know, this new situation has emerged, and combined with the quarantine, it's like this heat wave. So it's like our conditions are sort of reacting or dictating somehow what's going on in the world. Interesting.
It is very interesting. And where did you move from, by the way?
From Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I'm from, actually.
Wow. I love Nashville.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about that is that I feel like, I could be wrong, but this is just kind of my thesis. I think between 2016 and like 2019, up until last year, there was this huge, I don't even know what to call it, but there was like a huge opportunity for a lot of musicians. A lot of opportunities were found out in Nashville. So you found this constant cycle. Like musicians would be heading out there, moving out there, and then back and forth. People from Nashville would be coming, which obviously I feel like you kind of were part of that wave. You came out here a little bit. And it's interesting. I'm not sure how it is now just because everything's changed because of this quarantine. But for a little while there was tons of movement going on between the two cities, between Nashville and LA.
Definitely.
Did you, what was it about LA? Actually, before we even get into that, because I can ramble on for a very long time and I don't want to lose focus because there's a lot of stuff I want to try and ask you about, but you're a very, very, very talented musician. I want to pick your brain a little bit on some stuff. Why don't you go ahead and walk me through a little bit about, you know, music, how you got started with music, and then how you found your way to LA and kind of like how that career started?
Sure. Well, me personally, I grew up in Nashville, as I said, and I think a lot of musicians, I don't know if we can even identify the origin of interest. It's just something that we've always done. I mean, I've sung and played guitar since I was 4 years old. And Matt and Adam are the same. You know, they just have always played an instrument. Maybe they picked it up a touch later, but you know, it's a hobby that you pick up when you're young, and if you're lucky, you don't put it down until you've made a career out of it, and you're much older. So that's kind of our story with music. I picked up a guitar when I was 4 or 5. I was singing and playing, and then I was in high school, and I started to get into the jazz band and take some jazz guitar lessons, and that really expanded my sensibilities, my knowledge of music in general. I started taking music theory classes as well, and got into more songwriting. You know, I grew up in Nashville, like I said, so there was a ton of that in the air all over the place.
Yeah.
So I plugged into the Nashville songwriting scene in high school a bit, and had an opportunity to sort of pursue that route. But I decided to go to college, so I went to Emory in Atlanta.
Okay.
And
I've never heard of the school, but is it a big school?
It's not that big of a school, no, and it's not at all a music school. It's a Division III school. It's got a good, private school, private university, good academics, and it just seemed like a school, like a good school where I was also a baseball player, so I wanted to play baseball in a Division III program so I could have time to pursue music also. And it was 4 hours away from Nashville, so it seemed like a great opportunity for me. And I ended up meeting Matt and Adam my freshman year. And
who are part of the band, right?
Yeah, these are the other two guys in the band. And that was, I guess, 2008 when we all met. And we started playing each other the songs that we'd written in high school. Each of us was in either a solo artist or had some kind of band in high school, and we're doing some songwriting. And that was the origin of the band. So we did 4 years. We were 4 years in Atlanta in college. And then we went on the road for 2 years with the Indigo Girls. We had been playing, shows throughout college and gotten the attention of the Indigo Girls manager, who asked us to open for them and ended up managing us as well for 3 years or so. So then we did 2 years opening for the Indigo Girls, which was our first real touring experience. And we were in Atlanta for about 3 or 4 years after we graduated school. So the origin of the band is actually in Atlanta.
Gotcha. You know what's interesting? I mean, I guess one of the biggest things that I would probably ask, 'cause there's a lot of cool things that you already mentioned based on your history that I would like to know, but I'm curious if at that early age, did you notice a big difference between what the music scene was in Nashville versus Atlanta at that time? Because like you said earlier, you could feel it in the air in Nashville, and I would imagine it's very similar to LA, especially growing up here. Because LA is such a huge entertainment town, you can kind of feel it growing up. You just know that this is a town for stuff like that, right? And right. I imagine growing up in Nashville, it's very similar. Atlanta is definitely a music hub as well, but different for sure. And I'm curious for you what you felt the difference was when you moved there, if there even was a difference, or what your impressions were.
That's a good question. When I was growing up in Nashville, I think I always had this 1 foot in, 1 foot out mentality. Like I'm not a country music artist. I wasn't at the time a country music fan. I mean, maybe that had to do somewhat with just wanting to be different, wanting to be sort of rebel against the norm.
Yeah.
Later in my life now, I've gotten more appreciation. I've grown to appreciate country music more than I did then. And I realized that I actually remember a lot of songs and things like that from my upbringing that I didn't even know that I had that had sort of bled into my psyche. But when I got to Atlanta, I was not that aware. I think I was just happy that it wasn't Nashville. It was a new city that I knew had its own musical identity. I didn't really know how that applied to me, and I wasn't even really concerned with that. I just knew that I was about to go onto a college campus. I was going to bring my acoustic guitar, and I was going to write and sing and play and try and just get my do my thing on the campus and then see what happened. And that's pretty much what happened. I mean, I played a couple gigs at a coffee shop when I first got there. And then I met Matt in music theory class, and we started playing songs together. And then Adam and he were in an a cappella group together. And so that's how, and then Matt introduced Adam and I, and the three of us then met and started playing together. It was never about, let me tackle Atlanta, I want to take on this scene. It was like, let me try and work this campus and like start to develop a rep on campus. And it just seemed like an easier, more manageable goal at the time. And then once we started to play shows on campus and establish ourselves as like the go-to band, if anybody wanted us for music for a frat party or even a school event, then we started to get our chops up, our skill set up, and then we took it on the road and took it out into Atlanta and started to play venues that had nothing to do with our college.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about that is I kind of want to chime in a little bit in your past, because I think it's a very, very interesting little detail. If you don't mind me asking real quick, what was it about country music that you didn't like at the time? And I'm not sure if you like it now, but obviously everyone has their opinions for every genre that exists. And I think a lot of musical tastes are determined on where you grow up. You know, it doesn't really matter. Across the board, you can find influences from all over the place because, you know, you just grow up and that's what you have access to. Nashville is notoriously known for being a huge singer-songwriter / country town. And I say singer-songwriter because I do believe the genres are starting to merge a little bit. There's a lot of differences or a lot of like different stuff happening. But for the longest time, Nashville was known as a predominantly like country town. Like you'd go there to go do country. I find it really odd. Well, maybe not odd. It does kind of make sense that because you're around it so much, you may want to separate yourself a little bit and try something new. But it's also very common for people to have huge country roots. I'm generally curious for someone like you who's doing some really cool things with music. It's surprising to me that you didn't or don't have a huge country background in that sense. What was it about it other than just trying to be different? Was there anything more that you didn't enjoy about the music?
Yeah. Now that you ask it, I think there were two components why I didn't really latch onto it initially. One is I didn't see myself in the music. The music that I was listening to in my house, that was playing in the home was like, and the stuff that I was just gravitating towards was Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder and Earth, Wind and Fire, George Benson. You know, these were the kind of artists that were playing in my home. So, and that's the way that I like to sing. That's the way that I like to imagine my songwriting to be. And when you looked into country music, I just didn't see myself reflected back at me in that way. But so that's only one point. I mean, there are a lot of styles of music that I don't necessarily see myself doing. But I will say, like, in your formative years, you want the music that you grow up with is the music that, the music that really resonates with you, has a special place when you're 11, 12, 13, as opposed to now. And now I have much more appreciation for styles of music that aren't necessarily in my bag, so to speak, like what I resonate with the most. And I've expanded what that even means since then. But at the time, that's how I felt. And then the second component was, I think as I was learning about songwriting, I figured, I noticed that the songwriting was pretty formulaic. And again, as I've gotten older, I've learned to appreciate that formula and see kind of the gears turning behind the songs. And once you learn how it's written, you get such an appreciation for the songwriting craft. But I always loved chords and chord changes. And I remember when we moved back to Nashville from Atlanta, Matt, Adam, and I would get into these songwriting rooms with Nashville writers. And we would suggest a lot of, chords that maybe have diminished or augmented or all kinds of.
Oh man, I can imagine how that went. Oh Jesus.
Altered bass notes and whatever sort of. And I remember they always used to call. They used to say, "Well, that's an out of town chord." That's the word they used to use.
That's funny, dude.
Yeah, so we have a lot of out of town chords in our repertoire, and you have to learn how to massage that in. There's obviously of like a value to the formula that Nashville has adopted and made and gotten so successful from. And so my goal as a songwriter and Adam's and Matt's is in the Shadowboxers, what we want to do is have a song be as listenable and digestible as the Nashville format tends to be, while also adding in these elements of sophistication that maybe live beneath the surface but are definitely there.
Yeah, you're a very well-spoken musician, by the way. Something I'm picking up as I'm talking to you.
Thanks.
No, seriously, you have a good way of communicating your ideas, and I love that. I think that's very useful for a musician to have. Here's the interesting part about some of the stuff that you said, and I think I'm picking this up just because I don't know. I just feel like this might be what you have been doing. But you did say that when you were in high school, you got involved with the jazz band. You did all those things. Is that what you went to school to study for? Did you study jazz or strictly other music?
I didn't go to school with a major or minor set out. I went kind of open-minded, knowing that I wanted to play in the jazz band or study music. I ended up minoring in music. And that was mostly because the obligations that I needed to fill in order to major in music took place in the afternoons, and I was playing baseball through college. So
okay.
That was sort of like a limitation, but I'm glad for it because it allowed me to study other things. I ended up majoring in philosophy, which was, something I wouldn't have done if I didn't have those limitations with time with my schedule. So I'm grateful for that, and I was able to use a lot of the infrastructure and classes and resources there to get what I wanted out of music. So, and I met Matt through music theory, and we used to use the facilities to practice there all the time. Matt, Adam, and I would go into the music rooms, practice rooms, and practice all the time. So, like, I never feel like I got shortchanged from accessing the music resources at school.
You pretty much got the best of both worlds in that sense. Because I studied commercial music industry out here in Los Angeles, and I went to the Northridge School, Mike Curb. And Mike Curb, I believe, is from Nashville.
That's Belmont right there.
Yeah, and I believe there's another school
name's
too.
All over. Yeah, probably. I used to live right next to Belmont, which is a really prestigious music school in Nashville, and I know they have the Mike Curb Center and probably a couple other buildings with his name on it. So yeah,
it's crazy. I feel like you, out of all people, would know his name. There aren't many people that I've encountered that recognize the name. I think it's familiar to them, but they wouldn't be able to recognize it like you have. So good on you. And that's actually one of the cool things I did love about studying music. I did not enjoy so much all the other prerequisites, but the things that you mentioned are definitely cool. Access to the facilities and being able to study some theory and things that improve your musicianship. That's probably where the most enjoyment comes from.
Yes.
And here's the interesting part about your career so far, or at least your history from One Engaging. You're clearly a very knowledgeable musician. Like, you clearly come from some commercial roots, you studied jazz, and then you studied theory. So you, more or less, if I'm not mistaken, you know what you're doing musically. And I think that's fantastic. At least to some degree. You kind of hesitated there for a second.
I'll let you keep going before I try and counter that. But yeah, you're getting to another point, so I'll let you go. Well, thanks so far for saying what you've said, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate that. My point, in which is hopefully ties into what you were trying to chime in on, is you come back to Nashville and you bring in your style to Nashville. And it is interesting that you mentioned that the songwriting that is very known worldwide, I would argue, is very formulaic, and I think that's established because it's a successful formula. I believe that formula has yielded many, many hits over many, many years. How does one, or I guess I'm curious more about your opinion, because you clearly are knowledgeable, as I mentioned. Do you ever feel the urge to just change the formula a little bit? and I believe you were already starting to say something very similar to that. But, like, for example, when you said you're bringing out-of-town chords, I can imagine, as someone who knows how to make those harmonic progressions and how those chords and triads, all that, tritones even relate, isn't it kind of boring to just focus on the 1 minor 6, minor 2, and then the 5, and then go back and then just do triads over and over? I mean, I'm generalizing here, but I'm curious what you think.
So that's a good question. I think I think there's a couple ways I'd like to answer that. One is,
I'll pick your favorite. I'll pick the favorite one. I'm just kidding.
okay. We'll get to this at some point, but our relationship with Justin Timberlake in that part of our career. But one of the pieces of advice that he gave us is from a songwriting perspective, and this was advice given him by Rick Rubin. I know I just dropped some names here, but
my ears are open, man. My ears are open. Lay it on me.
I'm only saying that because it's been passed. This advice has been passed along through two people worthy of all of our respect. And he gave it to us, which was write a song for one of your favorite artists, and then you sing it, you play it. So that's sort of, if I were to write a song for a country artist, or if I were to write a song for the Eagles or whoever it may be, and then I sing it and play it, it's going to sound like me. So I don't really concern myself as much if a song, some of the most complicated songs have 3 chords in them,
True.
Even Stevie, who's like the sort of benchmark for how to marry complexity and simplicity. He has a lot of songs that have only 3 or 4 chords in them. So it's not always about just loading up a song with chords. There are many times that I've tried to write a song, and I've written a song. I've tried to make it as good as possible with only 3 chords in it, or 2 or 4. But then you just have to find other ways to get in that sort of sophistication element. And like I said, even if it were to be a simpler song, the way that I deliver that as me, or the way that the Shadowboxers deliver it as with our 3-part harmonies, which are our sort of bread and butter and like kind of our unique calling card, we can do that. And we've covered a lot of songs over the years.
Yeah.
We started, as I said, as a playing frat parties and things like that. So we covered a lot of songs. We've covered in like kind of, you watch the Beatles documentary and you know about the Hamburg years and how they were playing hour-long or like hours-long sets covering all kinds of songs of the day. We put in those kind of 10,000 hours doing all of that, and you learn about the construction of songs when you cover other people's songs, and you learn sort of how to see yourself in those styles. So I don't see country music as something foreign to me. I see it a lot of times as pop music that has a singer with a twang. And if I were to sing that song,
that's a good observation, man.
Thanks. Yeah, if I were to sing a song by Thomas Rhett, I would bump the key up a little bit and I would sing it my way, and it would probably sound like a really cool pop song. So it's not always worth putting these things into the boxes that a consumer would put them in. From a songwriting craft perspective, a lot of times they're way more similar than we think they are.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned Stevie, and I just want to clarify for some of those who may not know, you're referring to Stevie Wonder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah. I mean, there's Stevie Ray Vaughan's another example, but I wasn't. Yeah, Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, he's a classic. I mean, no matter he's still making bangers to this day, which is insane. But I feel like that's a testament to basically what you were saying is good songwriting, being formulaic to some degree, but also allowing yourself to shine through that formula. And I'm actually kind of curious because I know that some listeners of the show or some people who might chime in may not be so aware of the formula that you're talking about. And I think it's one of those things where we subconsciously already know the formula because we've grown up on pop music. We've heard many, many, many artists do a similar kind of formula that succeeds in pop music. if you don't mind paraphrasing in your own specific way, in your experience when you moved back from Atlanta to Nashville and you started kind of rubbing shoulders with some Nashville songwriters, and especially in that world that is so successful in writing hit songs, what did you notice was part of this formula, or how would you describe the formula? I know it has different versions and different people would describe it differently, but in your eyes, I'm honestly genuinely curious as a musician who is to some degree knowledgeable. I'll leave it like that. How would you describe the formula? What was your impression of it and all that?
Well, from a chord progression standpoint, like you mentioned earlier in this conversation, there are sort of relationships between chords that are very common, kind of like think of them as words, like words that flow well together, one after the other. And so that's kind of the way that a lot of country music songs think about the chord structures. So like, if they use famously what's called the Nashville number system when they chart out their chords, and there usually aren't that many complex chords in them. Everything is usually in the key of the song, and they use a lot of one, the root chord, the tonic number, 1, 4s, 5s, 6 minor, and 2 minor. Those are very commonly used. Occasionally something else, but essentially they're taking a lot of things off the table chord-wise and sort of using a much more limited playbook that works every time in terms of the way the notes work out together. And then lyrically, a lot of Nashville songwriters will approach a song from the title first. Well, first of all, like the country music listener, like fan base, they there are a lot of themes that resonate.
That's right.
With that fan base. So, you want to sort of hit some of those themes, and use a lot of those sort of buzzwords. What I do love about so let me finish that point. So when you approach from a title first perspective, the title usually appears at the end of the chorus. So the song structure is usually verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, maybe a bridge, and then a final chorus.
Right.
So
the classic formula that pays. That's the formula that pays the bills.
Yep, 3.5 minutes, done. And usually the title is the sort of payoff line at the end of the chorus. And it can often be like set up in a really clever way, like a turn of phrase. And that's the thing that I've learned a lot from the Nashville songwriting world is they set up, it's like a punchline is coming of a joke. I remember a special that Dave Chappelle just did where he told the audience the punchline, and then he...
Oh, yeah, okay. I know what you're talking about,
you and I both know.
Yeah, we both know. I think a lot of people will know, but yeah.
Yeah, and then he tells you the joke, and it's coming, and you still laugh when he gets to the punchline. It's kind of like that in country sometimes, where the title is going to be the end of the chorus. The rhyme that sets it up is going to have the same rhyme as the last line of the punchline, and yet it hits when it gets there. So because it's all about the red carpet that you lay out to get there, and if you do that properly, then you get the payoff. And it comes down to the syllable as to how much juice you can get out of that punchline. So from that perspective, I've learned a lot about songwriting. As just a means to set up the idea that you're trying to get across.
Gotcha. Wow, that's incredible. Like you laid that out in an incredible way. Again, me as someone who's not a songwriter, I'm primarily a drummer, right? And I obviously do this, but it's crazy because I'm aware of it subconsciously that there is a formula that exists, and I hear people throw that phrase around all the time, but I feel like I've never really understood it the way that you have explained it. It sounds intricate, but when you really try to understand it or wrap your hand around it, it's not that complicated. And by the way, for some of you guys who may not be so clear a little bit about like the chords and stuff like that, I think what my man Scott is trying to basically explain is these chords are essentially little patterns of notes that have been predetermined over many years that we just like. And in pop music, I think there's this actual comedy routine. I don't know by who, but it's been done many times. But it's that 4-chord song. You know what I'm talking about? Where
yeah, I think there's YouTube videos of it where people just cycle a 4-chord progression that's very common, and then they sing 30 songs over it, all of which we know, and you never would realize because of the productions. You would never think that they all share the same chord progression, but they really do.
Yeah, and that's basically the term right there, chord progression, the progression of the progression of chords of how the song is played. But the one thing I'm really fascinated about is you were mentioning how even the syllables, they take that into account, understanding how many syllables you have to get to that hook. Is there like when you are writing a song, or basically internally, do you already know how many syllables you have to hit in order to get to the hook, or is that just something that's felt out and kind of improvised?
Both happen. I think a lot of times if you're approaching from the title first, like in the Nashville style, what's often the Nashville style, if you know the end point and you're trying to work your way back to it from you're humming a lot of gibberish syllables. That's what happens actually, Nashville or not. That happens all the time. Where like if I'm writing, for example, you're sort of humming these gibberish syllables, and sonically what sounds good, what feels good, and then oftentimes you're trying to match up words to those syllables. So you're not really replacing, adding, or subtracting. You're replacing. You're not adding or subtracting syllables.
Gotcha.
From like this gibberish thing that feels good.
Yeah, and I'm curious about this for you, since I don't know, like your story really fascinates me. Do you feel like that formula could ever reach a point where it's just so overdone that people don't like it anymore? And obviously, I think that's a very subjective question. It depends on who you ask. And clearly that formula has been used for decades, so maybe the answer is obviously no. But I'm curious for you specifically, did you, as you were starting to become more aware of it and seeing all these people, use it to successful degrees, is it possible for people to ever get tired of that, of that formula?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, if as far as popular music goes, we've been singing about the same things for 70 years, and probably more. Just since, recorded music has come into our lives more prevalently. We've been singing about the same things. Now, we're not singing Tutti Frutti now because that's not or we're not even saying the word boogie, because these words aren't relevant to our time. But as long as there are songwriters to update these topics that are always going to be universally relevant to us, with terminology that applies to the modern culture and the modern experience. And as long as there are producers out there who want to update the sounds of things with innovations and technology, and then all of these subjects are going to never go out of style because they're going to be delivered in a way that's relevant.
Yeah. Do you feel like as a musician, does it take a lot of discipline to be able to execute that formula in a very good way? And the reason I bring that up is because this is kind of my own personal experience. I don't know if you relate to this, but I'm curious. As a drummer growing up, all you want to do is play fast and play intricately, right? And there's some people, some drummers that I would say equal 50-50 split off at some point. Some remain pursuing that route, trying to push the boundary, trying to be as fast as possible, explore the limits of what it means to be drumming. And then at some point, other people like myself branch off and sort of try to apply it. I don't know how to describe it, but it becomes a more emotional approach, especially when you get involved with singer-songwriters and pop music. You start to realize that less is more, and you start to you really start to try to capitalize on what it means to play less as a drummer. Now, that's just specific for drummers.
Yeah.
I'm curious for you as a musician, a guitarist, all that. Do you find it challenging to be able to remind yourself like, hey, I know I'm capable of like a lot more technically wise, but maybe creating popular music or music that is still my own, but to some degree is commercially viable and follows this formula. I want to try and do that. Do you find yourself like it takes discipline to do that, or not really at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of the path, a very sort of common path of a kid who's got musical ability is to see how far that ability goes. And that would manifest itself in ways like playing really fast as a drummer, like you say. And then as you get older, or in my case, singing as many runs as I can, or trying to fit as many chords into a song as I can, or key changes or whatever. And then you reel that in when you sort of get a better understanding of the power of subtlety, the power of simplicity, and the key is, the hardest thing as a songwriter is to write a simple song really well, because it's like making a grilled cheese sandwich. It's like anyone can do it, but the greats can somehow elevate something so simple so that you know that it was done by someone expert.
I don't think I've ever heard of a grilled cheese sandwich being used in a musical analogy before. That's
Do you remember? Have you seen Chef, that Jon Favreau movie?
No, it's on my list, but no, I heard it's good. I heard it's amazing.
Yeah, it is really good, and he makes a grilled cheese in that, and I must have watched it recently because that's what's on my mind. He's a chef in the movie, and he makes a grilled cheese, and it's like, you're looking at it, you're like, I've seen grilled cheeses before. I've eaten grilled cheeses before. This looks like the best grilled cheese I've ever seen in my life. And that's kind of like what expert songwriting is. It's like taking chords that are familiar, taking ingredients, words, melodies that are familiar, and adding them together in a way that somehow makes you feel something you haven't felt before. I also want to just knock myself down a peg. You're really complimentary of my ability. I think I'm lucky that I'm able to know a lot of these chords and more sophisticated concepts on a pretty basic level, so that I'm not even like, there's so much that's shut off to me that I don't have access to, that I don't even have to worry about whether or not I include it in songs. Like, I'm sort of at this nice midpoint of knowing just enough of like the top tier, like higher level stuff to apply it into pop music. But if I ever go into a jazz club and hear guys who have much more knowledge than I do, I'm as lost as anybody. So
that's everybody, man. That is absolutely everybody. Because
I know just enough to sprinkle it on top of a pop song format and feel good about myself. But I'm not at all claiming to, be burdened by my knowledge of music,
Yeah, and actually that is a very phenomenal way of describing it, to be burdened by your knowledge of music. I speak from experience, just because for so long, as I mentioned, I'm a drummer and I was very much in love with intricacy and all of that, which every musician to some degree is, like you mentioned. But I do feel like it takes extreme amount of discipline and control to be able to balance both the ability of just getting really, really technical and really complicated and creating something for the masses. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a very broad way of explaining it. But
yeah,
I think there's a reason why jazz and a lot of the really complicated stuff is very niche. It's because while it's cool and I love it, it just doesn't relate on an emotional level to many people. It does if you know what's going on, but otherwise it's very niche. You know what I mean? It's like almost like watching baseball. I think a lot of people understand how the game works and there's a fun aspect to it. But once you get into the stats and you start to get really, really intricate into like what all those stats mean, the different players, all that, it's like a huge barrier difference, you know what I mean, of enjoyment at least. And I think
that's a great analogy.
I appreciate that, but I think that's a huge challenge in musicality because, and here's where I kind of want to hear your opinion a little bit, because as a jazz musician myself, and you relate a little bit to that, you do find that there is like a us versus them mentality a lot when it comes to musicians who get really, really good at intricacy, at technique, at jazz, and other examples. I wish I had better examples, but jazz just keeps popping up in my mind, and I have huge respect for it.
Well, metal's another example.
That's another one. That's a really good example too.
Especially as a drummer, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of drummers who have had, like double kick pedals, and they're not giving anybody any time to breathe, which is the point.
Exactly.
But
it's the point. And here's the thing. A lot of those musicians that I've interacted with, I'm only speaking from experience, but I do feel like there is some room to assume that many of whom in that genre are the same or think very similarly, find it hard to appreciate more of the simple stuff. Not everybody, but I do feel like the guys who are really, really, really involved in the technical aspect of it all will have a difficult time understanding, the talent that goes behind writing a 4-chord song. There's almost like this, can you play, I don't even know how to explain it. Can you play bebop or whatever? If you can't play bebop, then you're not a good musician. But I feel like it's just two different techniques that require just as much practice to be able to write a good song that speaks to someone's emotion. I feel like that takes just as many hours as it does to be able to play something so intricate. Do you feel like, have you ever experienced that in your life? That's actually something I'm genuinely curious of. Have you experienced people that have kind of looked down upon songwriting or any of like the simpler stuff? Because you seem to be kind of in the middle to some degree. Like you said, you understand a little bit, which kind of puts you in this respectable category to some of the more traditionalists. You know what I mean? So I'm curious, like, what do you feel the vibe is like on both sides? If you have an opinion, if you feel like it's strong at all, like, I don't know. I'm just genuinely curious.
I mean, I would say there's a clear example of how I feel about simplicity versus complexity in music is, I remember on stage one time we were playing a show, and I don't take guitar solos that often in the band. I play rhythm guitar, and Adam he's our lead guitarist, and he takes huge solos, like way beyond what I'm able to do. He took a solo on a song we were playing, and it was just a loose enough atmosphere in the club. I don't remember what was going on, but I decided that I wanted to take a solo too. So I soloed after him. Now, I can't do half of what he does. So I played as few notes as possible to try and do the most different solo that I could do. And he played a lot of notes. I played a few notes. He played a high register. I tried to play low register, so that you don't fail by comparison. And I think, I don't know if I took a great solo or not, but I know that I took a different solo, and I know that as a listener you can hear it and have the space to hear it to be able to put it in a different place in your brain. And I think that's sort of the way that I deal with complex versus simple music. If I listen to too many simple songs in a row or too many complex songs in a row, my mind gets fatigued. And so, it's all about finding a balance of both that really makes each moment count. When you go really simple, you want that to feel like you are just breaking something down right in somebody's face and giving it to them in the easiest way possible.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you want to ramp up the energy and make somebody feel like their head's spinning. It's just it's all effective. It's just a matter of how you juxtapose these things so that they all have impact. Like Stevie Wonder, who we've talked about in this phone call, he's the master of this.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, I'm giving these like wordy answers, which is cool. That's just the way that I think. But I remember an interview that Stevie Wonder gave, and the question was like, like talking about songwriting, what's your process? Like a lot of the questions that you're asking me. And he said, there's good music and there's bad music. I try and stay away from the latter.
I love that.
I love that. It's like one of my favorite quotes of all time. It takes something. It reminds me that it's not that hard. It doesn't have to be over thought as much as we songwriters and musicians often approach music. It's just feeling. It's just having good taste and knowing, obviously coupled with ability, and knowing when to kick it into fourth gear, when to bring it down to first gear, so that when the moments are in fourth gear, you feel like it. You feel like you're going fast, and when you go slow, you feel like you need to go slow and catch your breath, and that's all. It's all about the relationship between those.
Yeah, I love that description and that phrase by Stevie Wonder. I mean, that's why he's the legend, and you're right. I think, and he's right too. I think the idea when it comes down to music, and I'm definitely culpable of this, overcomplicating things and feeling like everything needs an explanation. I mean, look at me, hear me talking. Like there's so much that can be explored about music, but at the end of the day, like you said, there's good music and there's bad music, and I absolutely love that description. And I'm curious for you then, being where you're at in your career and with your band, you guys have done some pretty cool things so far that I want to get into in a little bit. But talking a little bit about how you were, dishing out that solo and you played to the best of your abilities and it came out great. Do you ever feel like musically wise, like in the sense of being able to get more technical or get more complicated, whether with songwriting or with playing guitar, do you ever have that urge of just seeing how far you can take that instrument, or do you feel like your life has evolved where that's not a huge part of your life anymore?
Yeah, that's more how I feel. I don't feel the need to expand my guitar playing ability as much. I've established a really good foundation, so I feel fluent on the instrument. Like I can get my ideas out on it. Adam may feel differently. Adam has a completely different journey and relationship with the guitar, and that's
a good way of thinking about it, having a relationship with your instrument.
It really is. It's not a one-way street, and he's found a different path with the instrument and what it will allow him to do. For me, it's more of a songwriting tool at this point. I obviously want to keep. I will keep playing and keep my tools sharp, but when I have musical interests, the path that I want to go down and explore are not for increased proficiency on the guitar. It's more about songwriting and singing, and even production, how songs are put together in the recording process. That's what I find more interesting. So that's where I sort of put my energy.
I love that. As a side note, as we kind of begin to move on to other topics, one of the huge turning points for me in my life, I have to say it had to be when I got introduced to Steve Jordan, who's the drummer for...
oh, I know.
Yeah, for some of you guys who might not know, he's the drummer for the John Mayer Trio. I think sometimes he plays for the whole thing, but, John Mayer has like 3 or 4 different bands. But one of the things that I noticed from him, as I mentioned earlier, I was very much in love with intricacy and trying to be like the best technical drummer I could be. But then I found myself playing with more singer-songwriters, more pop bands, kind of like you a couple years ago. And I really got introduced to a lot of John Mayer stuff and a lot of Steve Jordan stuff. And I noticed, and I can't remember what solo it was or if it was a show or what it was, but I remember watching this video where he takes this solo, right? And it, obviously drum solos in general are kind of rare in the pop music, but whenever it happens, usually a couple things happen. Usually a lot of cymbals go flying, so drummers just go crazy on the cymbals, or they go super fast, or it's kind of like planned out where there's things happening between the drums and the band, whatever. What Steve Jordan did, which I loved, kind of reminded me of what James Brown used to do, is he just played the same beat for like a minute. You know, like, and maybe not a minute, but it was just like, it was like a that whole thing, and it just got fat. And I think halfway through he opened up his hi-hat a little bit, and then he just ended it with like a crash, and then everything came back in. And I don't know, something for me clicked where I felt like this huge impact that his drum playing had over me and over a lot of people, especially because people in the audience were going crazy, but he was just playing this groove. And what I'm getting at is Steve Jordan is known for being a groove master, for playing very just pocket grooves on the kit, even though he has some chops. So he can definitely kick it into fifth gear if he needs to, but he's found this sweet spot in his career where I feel like that's his bread and butter, you know, like those thick, fat grooves that he plays as a drummer, and he's just cashed in on that, you know, like he hones in on that, and that's why he's known as a really good drummer. And I think for me, that's kind of where I realized that I didn't need to be anything specific. I just needed to hear or really chime in into what I liked, you know, as a drummer, as a musician. And I think when you're young, you're kind of bombarded with all these different opinions, with you're watching musicians, you're watching all these things that you kind of feel the urge, or at least I did, to do it all. But then at some point I grew up to a point where I recognized, you know what? I like this and I like that, and I'm gonna hone in on that. And everything else, if I get to it, cool. If not, no big deal. And that's what I think happened to you to some degree, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and
I think it's the only way to perfect something is to find the thing that you can really make your own, and then just do that as much as you can.
Yeah, I definitely went on a little trail there, just talking about my opinions. But talk to me.
No, you're right.
I love it. Now, talk to me a little bit about what happened after you moved to Nashville, because you got heavily involved, or you were doing some songwriting. There's some cool things that happened after you were done opening for the Indigo Girls. You mentioned Justin Timberlake. I'm definitely curious to learn a little bit more about what happened after that. Like once you got how the whole Justin Timberlake happened thing, and then how the whole Justin Timberlake thing happened, and then how's that been going for you?
Right. So we graduated from Emory. We were living in Atlanta. We did 2 years opening for the Indigo Girls. We were also their backing band. So we would open, we would go off stage, we would come back on as their band and background singers and play their whole set as well. And we got so much experience from that, learning from the Indigo Girls, who we cannot say enough positive things about. They're aside from being incredibly talented songwriters, they were so professional with the way they tour and the way they just go about their work, and they couldn't be nicer to us. So it gave us a really good experience of how it's supposed to be done. We get off the road with this newfound sense of like professionalism and like care that we want to put into the craft. And we just didn't really have anywhere to put that. So we decided to do a YouTube series where we put out a cover. We did the first Tuesday of every month. We put out a cover for a year. And these songs were supposed to be, if we had a rule for them, we weren't aiming for the sort of the top 40 songs of the day for as many clicks as possible. We wanted to really showcase our musicality and our tastes, the songs that we love. We tried to vary them in some ways, in genre and in time. We wanted to do some more modern artists, some more artists of the past. And we did that. And one of the songs that we did was Push Your Love Girl by Justin Timberlake, which was the first track off of his 2020 Experience album.
Yeah, great song.
Great song, and blew us away when we heard it. And so we wanted to do it. And so we recorded it. We got it. We piled into this little room in Atlanta and had one of our friends film it. And we just played the song down live with a room mic and put it on YouTube. And somehow he saw it and he tweeted about it and he reached out to us personally and gave Adam a call. Adam's our most responsible member. So we were like, he asked for a phone number to call. We just gave him Adam's number and he called him. He told us that he's coming through Atlanta on tour and he wants to get together and meet with us over dinner. So we had dinner with him. We went to his show the next night, basically told him about our story and all of the years we'd spent playing in college and touring with the Indigo Girls and all of the experiences that we had sort of amassed along the way. And he wanted to help. He loved what we do and he wanted to help. So yeah, that began our relationship with him. For the next 3 or so years, we were writing songs and we were learning how to record songs ourselves and sending them to him. And we put a few songs out along the way, but we were mostly just learning how to demo our own songs to the point that we started with like single mic in the room recordings. And then we were doing like 100 plus track demos. And this is, Adam became our producer. We were always, I think this is sort of a cool little tidbit about our band. Like we always felt like we were one producer away from like really nailing the sound for us. And we've had, that's a whole nother element to this game is how to, because we started as a live band. We've played, and we are a live band. We played hundreds of shows before we ever got into a studio. So our concept of how to like get a song good is to write it and play it on the road and road test it and see how fans react to it. And that's sort of the way that we learned how to make music. Creating music in the studio first and then imagining how we play that live, that's a newer skill that we've had to learn.
Yeah.
So we are getting better at these demos, and then eventually we got in the studio with Justin in the summer of 2017, and we record along with another great producer named Keikov out here in LA. We made an EP called Apollo. And we released that at the beginning of 2018, and we went on tour with Justin as his opening act for the Man of the Woods World Tour, which was really cool. We spent most of 2018 on the road, playing in arenas for tens of thousands of people all over the country, and then in Europe, which was like a hugely different experience than anything we'd ever done. We were used to playing more club shows and maybe amphitheaters with the Indigo Girls, but much smaller venues. And that completely sort of opened our eyes to the fact that our music can be like projected to the top row of an arena. Like when you feel your voice bounce off the back of an arena wall, it makes you realize that these things can be bigger. Like it makes you want to make your music bigger.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like what the Apollo album or EP represented for us, is like this feeling of wanting of putting our flag in the ground and saying like we belong in the arenas of the world. We can compete on any level, and we can write music and have music that is intended for like a mass audience. So when you were talking about like drumming and this needing to like the Steve Jordans of the world who just find their pocket, and reel it in a little bit. After we got off the road, we moved to LA, and we felt that need. We felt the need to sort of get back to the basics of what we do and reel it in and find that pocket for us.
Yeah.
And that's what the Slow March of Time is for us. The album that we released a couple weeks ago, it's about taking all of these experiences and reeling them into something that feels very identifiable and authentic to us, and incorporates all of those years we spent in our dorm room writing songs and harmonizing, all of those years we spent on the stage with the Indigo Girls, learning about their harmonies and singing harmonies with them more in the folk pop world. Then, all the live shows we played and songs that we wrote in the 3 years between Indigo Girls and getting in the studio with Justin. And I should say we picked up an amazing rhythm section, Cole McSweet on drums and Carlos Enamorado on bass. And they went to Georgia State Jazz School and infused this amazing funk, R&B, soul sensibility into the band. And so we really fed off of that. And then getting into the studio with Justin and playing arenas, all of the experiences that we gained along the way, we just wanted to lock ourselves in the studio and use everything that we learned and kind of say, all right, what was it that we learned and what is it that we want to say? And this is a really long-winded answer, but
no, keep it going, man. I love it.
The point I was making several minutes ago was the production. We've always felt like we needed a producer to sort of get it there, and Adam, with Matt and I sitting right behind him, produced this whole album ourselves. And I find that to be really sort of motivating, indicative of these sort of motivational stories, anecdotes, quotes that we've all heard. If you want something done, do it yourself. But when it applies to you and you actually live it and feel it, it really is true, and it really does matter. We've spent a good chunk of our career thinking that we needed something else to sprinkle on us to get it there. And it was just in the making of this album that we realized we don't.
Yeah.
We've grabbed a lot of things, we've absorbed a lot of things from a lot of people, and we locked ourselves in the studio, and we wanted to see what happened. And we didn't let ourselves out until we ourselves, making all of the decisions ourselves, as independent artists, by the way. We were signed to Justin's artist development company during our time working with him. And then after the tour, we asked him, we spoke with him and told him that we wanted to sort of go an independent route. We just felt like that's where our hearts are at. And he supported it. He supported it completely.
Can I ask you just randomly, because I don't mean to interrupt, because I definitely want to keep it going, but I know that a lot of people, it sounds like a dream to be working and being mentored with someone like Justin Timberlake. I know a lot of people might be raising their eyebrows, and obviously I condone your decision for going independent, because I know a lot of artists do it and they find incredible success when they do it, and it's a very personal and hard choice to do. If I can pick your brain a little bit, why is that something that you guys chose to do? I know a lot of people would raise their eyebrows and be curious.
Yeah.
Because it sounds amazing to work with Justin, and I'm sure you guys still have a relationship, but going independent is definitely a huge decision that shouldn't be taken lightly. Why was it the best choice for you?
It's a great question, and I think and it's one that we had a hard time with. Justin approached us initially saying that he wants to support our artistry. He believes in what we do. He wants to just help facilitate that. So that's honestly the core of our relationship with him. And when we thought about it, there were a lot of things that were out of his control that were sort of clouding our ability to nurture our musicianship and our development, between the three of us and the five of us with our drummer and bass player. And we just didn't feel like we had room to run and explore the way that we really wanted to. And if we had ideas that we wanted to implement, we were in a system contractually that just didn't allow those ideas to come through smoothly. Things would kind of get tangled up and put on shelves, and it was just hard. It was just hard to really develop an idea, act on it, get it out.
Like what were some of those ideas, if I can ask?
Like release plans for different songs, and when those songs were going to come out, and what we wanted to do for those songs, surrounding those songs, and getting a budget approved to do that, for example. It was just hard to get approval from everybody. I think it was a lot of all of us looking around and wondering who's driving the car, who's holding the keys.
Interesting.
And we actually have great relationships with all of the people that we work with. I'm not just talking about Justin. There are a lot of other label. Yeah,
it's a label. There's tons of moving gears.
Yeah, and people on a distribution team that our team grew a lot, and we already have 3 guys in our band with conflicting opinions often. So getting all of the planets to align on an idea is hard. And so we felt like we were missing opportunities a lot, and our musicianship was feeling stretched, and we wanted to just get small again. So we got off the road and moved, and spoke with Justin, honestly, like as a friend. We put all of the other stuff aside, and we told him that all the things that we've built around this in order to try and help facilitate its growth, we think are prohibiting us from doing what we really feel is our calling right now. And he was, and I mean, his direct quote was like, "Guys, I totally get it. Yeah. I totally get it." It was a really healthy conversation and positive. He, endorses what we do. He supports it completely. And so we're happy to do that. Obviously I shouldn't, I don't want it to come off like we've turned our back on it. We haven't. We would, Justin said maybe this is even an opportunity for us to work together in the future in a much more creative way, now that we don't have some contract looming over our heads.
Yeah.
So
and that's important to note, by the way. I don't mean to cut you off a little bit, but I think it's something that unless you're really involved in the industry or have a similar experience like yours, it's very hard for a lot of fans or just the average commercial consumer to really understand when you need to achieve a artistic vision and you have a lot of things in place that prohibit you from getting to that artistic vision, how draining that can be. And I'm not arguing whether, contracts or labels or whatever are good or bad. I think that conversation and different points of views, in my opinion, don't really matter. I think at the end of the day, I always advocate for artists to always just trust themselves. And there are plenty of people who are more than comfortable in a contract. But it sounds like someone like you needed to get something done, and you had to take that decision to get that done. And I love the fact that Justin was supporting that, because I think someone of his caliber understands that concept too, of being able to have the freedom to achieve an art vision or a vision per se, because you can always come back. The idea is you can always reestablish yourself and get another contract or whatever. But to get the vision right, sometimes you need to either go back to the drawing board, reassess everything. Point being is, I think you make the right choice, and sometimes it can be a hard choice, but it's just to help the audience and people understand that sometimes you need to be able to make that choice as an artist.
For sure.
So then you decided to go independent a little bit, and Justin was very supportive. And I appreciate you being honest with me. By the way, I know a lot of people can be a little shaky on the honesty, but I think it helps artists grow to know other people's experiences. And it's cool that Adam produced it. I think it's one of those things where you're absolutely right that for so long you can convince yourself that you need an extra person or you need this thing in order to help make your product. But when you realize that with enough time and enough energy, maybe you have exactly what it takes to do it. I think that's probably one of the coolest feelings in the world. It must be. It must be really cool to watch your buddy produce your entire album.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that other artists don't need producers. Of course they do.
Like you said, it's an entire different topic. Producers do wonders for artists.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
It was just something that he inherently is good at and is interested in, and we've watched him produce all these demos that we've been making over the year. I mean, we have like over 200 demos of songs that we've written over the past 8 years or so that are just, I mean, many of them are good, many of them are bad, but a lot of them are really good, and a lot of them have really cool production stuff, and all of that was sort of leading to him stepping up to the plate. I remember the conversation it was right at the beginning or right at the end of 2018 when we got off the road with Justin. It was like, all right, this is the album we want to make. And Adam was like, I think I can produce it. And this is what I think we should do. And we just sort of fell in line. And, you know, when you're in a group of 3 guys, you know, you really just, it's about trying to support each other and trying to facilitate each other's strengths so that they feel empowered to do what they're good at. And Matt and I trusted that we've seen him develop the skill. We know that he's capable. And we know that we're right there, and he knows we're right there to give our feedback. And it became the most fun day at work for like a year straight, where, you know, we would all do what we do, and then you know, I show up to the studio, and you know, we just had a great time taking our time with it, doing everything as meticulously as we wanted to. And then we were able to look back on a finished product that, like, for us is the biggest accomplishment of our career so far. And it's not at all judging by accolades or streams or financial success. It's solving this, it's cracking this code of how to record ourselves, which has been the challenge for our whole career.
Yeah, I would argue it's the challenge for many, many artists, finding the right sound of the what. Because it always sounds cool in your head, and then you have some ideas, but it's very rare when it comes out like 100% what you were envisioning when you produce it. And that's why producers, as I mentioned earlier, and I think you might have said something similar too, like producers are a huge, huge support for artists. Like the ability to be able to take your idea and then mess with it and then, you know, deliver it the way that you better than you could ever imagine. That's a huge, huge skill set. And hats off to Adam. I'm not sure if he's around or at all, but I mean, hats off to Adam for being able to figure something like that out. And so then I'm curious then, because you were starting to talk about it a little bit, the Slow March of your album's name, which is The Slow March of Time Flies By, right? Yeah. That in your I guess the question is the theme basically for your fans, is the theme that this album is an amalgamation of all the experiences that you've had, you've put it on paper, and this is like, I'm not saying you're starting over, but it's like the idea of like, here's what the past couple of years have led up to. We're ready to go into a different direction. Is that what you're trying to share with your fans?
Yeah, it's like you said, it's about the journey, and it's about all of our journeys, really. I think there's something cool about the fact that we're not famous. We're not, wildly successful. There is an anonymity to who we are, which makes our story a lot more everyman, a lot more relatable. And I think a lot of people can look back on the past 10 years of their life and know that they put a ton of work in, and the time has flown, and it's also felt like a slow march. I also think that releasing it during this pandemic, when we're all quarantined in our homes, feeling like the days move by at a snail's pace, and then April and May are gone already, and we are
Yeah.
scratching our heads wondering where this year has gone.
We're halfway through already, man. It's crazy.
It's crazy. We all have this really warped concept of time right now. So obviously we didn't plan for that. And of course, if we would have had it our way, we would not have wanted this album to coincide with this pandemic. All we want to be doing is touring this album right now on the road, which we can't do. But it has added a layer of significance that's making it hit a lot harder for people than I think we ever intended it to.
Yeah. I love that. Especially, there's a couple of tracks on that album that I think just sound great, which again, to have it be mixed by your buddy who's like learned how to do it over time, I think it's fantastic. Especially Honeymoon. Honeymoon, I love that track. And I think a lot of people have shared that they love that track too. It sounds so great with your 3-part harmonies, and there's a chord in there that you're using that I heard it in the chorus where I don't know, I can't remember at the top of my head what it was, but I recognized instantly you were what chord was it? I think you went to like a dominant 7 or something. I'm not trying to get all dorky here, but I thought it was a very interesting choice that worked so well.
I think it's the B flat 7.
Yeah. Oh my God, dude. And I gotta say that I thought that was a very different but brilliant choice that normally wouldn't happen. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna play that section here so that people can hear what I'm talking about. Just like a quick little 10-second, 15-second snippet to show what I mean. When you hear it, I feel like your ear, even if you're not a musician, I feel like your ear would feel like it needs to go somewhere else. But it doesn't, but it still works. And I love those intricacies, man. Like I love when artists can do that subtly and it works so well. So as we kind of begin to wrap things up, I definitely tip my hat to you because as I mentioned earlier, you are a very, very well-spoken man. You're very clearly knowledgeable enough in music to make a difference. I'm curious what's next for you guys. Now, obviously, with every artist I've been talking to lately, and as we mentioned, we are still in a very difficult, interesting time. So a lot of plans are not being made, but I do know right now, the recording of this, it's June. I know that some plans are starting to be made or at least kind of anticipating some things. Are you guys trying to do some stuff or are you guys just sitting tight until things are a little more stable?
It's a little of both, obviously with the energies of the country and the world being focused right now on social justice.
Yeah.
We released our album right in the thick of that. So we are doing as we would want anyone else to do, which is to kind of take a pause on our own things right now and sort of think about what we can all do to learn more about the subject and to help out in ways that we feel we can help out. So that's been the immediate release of the album. When we are able to sort of process that and start to fold our own lives back into that, we are interested in getting as many eyes on this album as possible. Touring is mostly off the table, unfortunately. Aside from some virtual performances, we're probably not going to be touring for the rest of this year, unfortunately.
Drive-ins are coming back a little bit.
Yeah,
Have you heard about those? There's so many.
I know.
There's a couple tours being scheduled right now on for drive-ins. But the funny part is that because most of the drive-ins that actually exist are like in the Midwest or Texas or a lot of those states, it's only specific artists that have fan bases in those areas that can actually do it. But I do feel like most people would just go to get out of the house and be at the drive-in. But isn't that crazy?
I mean, to be on stage and to finish your song. And then to look out and just see a bunch of honking cars would be a real experience.
Yeah.
I mean, we would do stuff like that if the opportunity presented itself. We're like everybody else. We're just trying to stay on our toes, think of opportunities to play and promote this album in a way that's sort of respectful of the times that we're in, and also we think intending to give this album the attention that it deserves. We'll be releasing some other things into the year that are going to, I guess that's unannounced at this point, but we're gonna continue to sort of try and throw some logs onto the fire of this album and give it the attention that it deserves.
I love it, man. And I love that you are very open-minded and that it just sounds like you know exactly where you want to go. You're not afraid of taking those choices. And you are also really good at just kind of accepting when things happen, and you're good at maneuvering. And I think that's why you've had a very good and interesting career this far. And I have no doubt that it's probably and most likely going to go to bigger places that you couldn't imagine. And as we kind of start to end things a little bit, I do want to say thank you, my man Scott, for being on the show. I really do appreciate your insight. You're a very well-spoken man, honestly. I mean that from the bottom of the heart.
Thank you.
You're really good at explaining your points of views, and I think that's a very good thing. For anybody out there that is in a similar position or they're a musician or artist of some degree and they want to try and do excuse me, my voice is all weird right now. For any artists out there that is trying to, make it or trying to push their career to the next level, what would you say is one thing that helped you along the way? Just to kind of summarize what we've talked about today, what is one thing you would recommend that they could do, or something that has helped you along the way?
I would watch or learn about Bill Withers' career.
Oh my God! Yes.
Watch the documentary Still Bill about Bill Withers, or just take a second and do a Wikipedia on him, because
he was like 32, right?
Yeah, he was over the 30 line when he decided that he wanted to start music. And all of the things that we've been talking about today, the simplicity of music, the way that a message can just cut through if it's delivered purely and honestly, and the fact that age doesn't have anything to do with it. He embodies that. And I would not say, I'm 30 myself, I would not say that I spend a lot of time worrying about my age and my relevance. I don't at all. That's just not my personality. But if I find myself going there, or if I see other people sort of playing the game of comparing themselves to other people and what ages everyone is, or what stages everyone is on the journeys that they're each respectively on, I think about him, and I think about how he just did it on his terms when it made sense to him, and his music endures in a way that is rare.
Yeah.
And it's just because when it bubbled up in his life, on his journey, on his terms, he did something about it. So the advice I would give anyone is to listen to yourself. And if it feels like you want to give it a shot and you have something to say, then go ahead and say it, and you never know.
I love that. What was the name of the Bill Withers documentary again?
It's called Still Bill.
Still Bill. Bill Withers, amazing artist, and that's actually really good advice. I haven't seen it, but I definitely want to check it out and recommend everybody out there to watch that. My man Scott Tyler of the Shadowboxers, you're an amazing, amazing artist. I love the way that you communicate, and I love the advice you gave. Thank you so much, my man, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. All right, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Scott Tyler. I know that I definitely did. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, I have done this for a while, and I'm going to be slowly uploading a lot of the interviews that I have done. I've been experimenting with different ways of doing this. Because I do a lot of the interviews over the phone, it's a little, for me at least, maybe you guys can tell me otherwise, but I'm not a huge fan of just posting a video of two of us chatting on Zoom. To me, it's just not really my style. So I'm going to be messing around with different ways of doing this. But definitely let me know how you like this interview in the comments, or feel free to send me a message. But I have a lot of interviews coming your way, a lot of new ones. I do this at least once or twice a week. And if you have any up and coming artists that you're a fan of, that you maybe want to learn their story a little bit, feel free to drop their name in the comments or send me a message. I'm very active on my socials. I'm very active on my email. You can find all that information in the About page for this YouTube page. So until next time, guys, stay safe. I love all of you, and stay tuned because I have tons of great interviews coming your way.